Scott Harris and his wife Randy retired to South Carolina in March of 2020. This is something that Scott will tell you was one of the best decisions they have made in their 44 years of marriage. It was then that Scott first started birding, a hobby he had never imagined himself participating in, but now cannot imagine living without. They sold their longtime home and business, Mustang Marketing, a marketing branding company, and moved to South Carolina. While they were in California, Scott had a syndicated newspaper column and two weekly radio shows. He and his son Justin also hosted a Los Angeles Dodgers weekly live radio show. His interests and hobbies include the largest collection of John Steinbeck's Travels with Charlie in the world, playing the harmonica in a blues band for 5 years, and he has written almost 50 books in the past 6 years, primarily a bunch of Westerns. But tonight, he is discussing his latest endeavor, RaptorQuest, Chasing America's Raptors. This is a story of his year-long adventure tracking down every species of raptor in the lower 48 states. And today, we'll learn about all of his adventures, misadventures, successes, and failures. And so with that, Scott, I turn the audience over to you. So the audience is all yours.
Well, thank you, Dennis, very much, and everybody at Peoria Audubon that is checked on, and for making this possible, and for all of you that are here tonight. I do have to point out the statement about the world's largest collection of Travels with Charlie. When my wife was with me when I'm speaking, she likes to point out it's because I have the only collection of John Steinbeck's Travels with Charlie. So it might not be as significant as it appears sometimes. But I'm excited to be here tonight. I'm excited about this to share about my adventure. This book and the photos are a huge part of the journey that I took. I do love to write. I do write primarily Westerns. As a matter of fact, my newest one was released today, and I enjoy that. But this is a labor of love, RaptorQuest, and as much as I enjoyed the book and the journey, I think the most important part was the people that I met along the way and had an opportunity to share some time with them. People around the country were incredibly helpful in helping me find birds and learn more about birds and especially raptors. So that was an absolute joy. Okay, so we should be able to. There we go. All right. As Dennis had mentioned, I was not a birder when I moved to South Carolina, which was unfortunate because my wife and I have traveled to about 40 different countries in every state. So I can only imagine how many birds I might have seen on those trips had I been looking for them. But I will find what I can in the time that I have left. These bald eagles, for example, when we moved here from Southern California, the very first day we were here in our backyard, a bald eagle flew over the house and landed in a tree on the property. And although I was not a birder on that day, I took that as a neat sign. These two bald eagles here are from Maine, and any of you that follow or chase the rarities, the last couple of winters there has been a stellar sea eagle up there in Maine, and I managed to get up there this past February and the February before. But in addition to the stellars, there's usually about a dozen or 15 bald eagles. And it's an odd thing, by the way, to be looking at bald eagles that are maybe 2/3 the size of a stellars. You're so used to seeing balds and goldens as the largest birds around. So that was a neat thing to see. Right up front, I want to mention I'm not a scientist or an ornithologist. I'm just a writer and a hobbyist. And one of the motivations for this, I imagine a lot of you have seen the movie The Big Year. I saw it long before I was a birder, just because I liked the three actors in it, and I thought it was a fun movie and enjoyable. And the idea of doing something along those lines was intriguing to me. And the more I thought about it, I realized I'm not going to go out for a year and try to find every single bird that I could find. I needed something more finite. And while I enjoy all birds, raptors definitely have a special place in my heart. And I thought, well, you know what? 53 raptors in in the lower 48. I might be able to do that. And so I thought that would be a really fun big year. It turned out to be 17 months, not 12. And I think if I was to do it again with the experience I've gained, I could do it in 12 months. I would just have to be better at some of the birds that we don't get here for very long. One of the things that I learned as I went through this is that there is no generally accepted definition of raptor. Different people have tried to put forth definitions of raptors, but there is nothing that is accepted by everybody. It reminds me, for those of you that remember, Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart in 1964 was famously asked to define pornography. And he said, I can't do it, but I know it when I see it. And I think in a lot of ways, that's kind of what it is with raptors. So this is the breakdown of the 53. You've got the 3 vultures, the turkey, the black, and the condor. You've got 19 owls and then 31 primarily diurnals, the hawks, the eagles, the osprey. But even among this, there are debates. A number of people are advocating that we take vultures out of the generally accepted list of raptors, which I would do if it was up to me. Harlan's hawks, which are a subspecies of redtail, probably in the next couple of years will be broken out as a separate species. It has been in the past twice, so it's been lumped and split, and lumped and split, and now it's lumped. But it's expected that it's going to be split as well. A number of the owls and diurnals that you chase don't spend very much time in the U.S. and don't cover very much territory. The hook-billed kite is more of an occasional visitor up from Mexico. And then you've got the northern hawk owl, the snowy owl, and the great gray owls. They're really Canadian. They come down for a little bit in the winter, but this being American, us being American, we go ahead and claim them anyway. And so that is how we wind up getting to these 53. This was my canvas, the lower 48 states, and using eBird as my guide. So the stats that I'll share with you this evening all come from eBird. So for those that use it and value it, that's great. For those that don't or aren't familiar with it, just so you know, this is where I picked up all my numbers. There are 20 of the 53 raptors have been found in all 48 states. So that was kind of cool. I don't think that I would have guessed that, but I enjoyed finding that out. And so you've got them covering the entire thing. 2 of them, the northern goshawk, now the American goshawk, that got changed since I wrote the book, and the northern saw-whet owl have been to 47 of the 48 states, and both of them have skipped Louisiana. So they have surrounded Louisiana. I don't know if they don't like parishes or Cajun food, or I think we've got a hurricane landing there tonight, so maybe that keeps them away. But those 2, the snowy owl has skipped 2 states, Arizona and New Mexico. And then there are 5 that are normally found. I'm sorry, I have to change my screen here a little bit because it's going to block some stuff. And then 5 of them are normally found in 3 states or fewer. The Applamata falcon, the ferruginous pygmy owl, the whiskered screech owl, the hook-billed kite, and the white-tailed kite. And most of those are primarily Texas birds sneaking over into New Mexico and Arizona. As far as the trip goes, this is kind of how I did it. I preferred to drive. I've always preferred to drive. And I just like the idea of figuring out what's on the road and what's coming up and seeing what's happening. So I made 7 cross-country road trips to Montana, California, Texas, Florida. I did multiple trips to some of those. Texas, I think, was 4, and Montana was 4. I did a number of flights around the country. I traveled 25 weeks and visited 34 states and traveled over 100,000 miles on the trip. And I did tens of day trips and overnight trips in addition to that. I hear people complain all the time about the airlines. I had tremendous great luck with the airlines. With the different legs that I flew, I took over 50 different flights, and every one of them left on time, and all but one of them landed on time. And the one that didn't, I flew into Houston and then was going to go down to Harlingen, Texas, down in that southeast corner, maybe the best birding in the country. And I was headed down there, and we were about 15, 20 minutes away. And it was about 11:30 at night. The pilot comes on and he says, hey, we got a little problem. There's a lot of fog in there. We're not sure we're going to be able to land in Harlingen. We've got about 15 minutes worth of fuel left. And so we're going to see if we can't sneak in under that fog. And if not, we'll turn around and go back to Houston. Well, I'm not a pilot, but we were 45 minutes from Houston. And he said we had 15 minutes worth of fuel left. And he must have figured out what he said, because about 2 or 3 minutes later, he came back on and he goes, what I meant was we have 15 minutes of fuel that we can play around with. And then we still have plenty to get back to Houston, which is what wound up happening. We went back to Houston and spent the night there and then caught a flight out in the morning. The truck never broke down. I never had problems with people that I met or anything. It was a magical time for travel. The trips just couldn't have gone any better, with one exception. And these, for example, are 34 states that I hit. And the only exception to that was I was up in Montana in Kalispell looking for a snowy owl. And there was a little place there called the Flathead Lake Sky Ranch Airport. And there had been a snowy owl reported there. And so I took off and went up there, flew up there. And Monday through Thursday, I spent 2-3 hours every morning and afternoon and never found the dang owl. And Friday morning, there was a place that I knew that was about 3 hours away that's just magical for raptors. Well, I'm just going to go over there and spend the day. And I did. Found 119 raptors in the 3 hours I was over there. It's just this open farming plain on the far western side of Montana. And so I thought, well, you know what? I can race back and get to that airport just before the sun goes down. Maybe I'll find it tonight. And so I punched in Manning Road on my GPS, and it said 3.5 hours and gave me the directions. And that's how long it had taken me to get where I was. So I didn't pay any attention, put my book on and was listening to my book. And by the time I looked up and paid attention, I was in line to cross the border into Canada. I had gone completely the wrong way. It turns out there is a Manning Road in Alberta, Canada, that was also 3.5 hours away from where I was. And my GPS took me and I blindly followed it. And the drawback to that was when I got to the Canadian border, I did not have a passport. I didn't expect to go into Canada. They weren't happy about that at all. They detained me for about 3.5 hours, tore my car apart, and finally let me go, gave me a piece of paper that said, we've checked him out, he's good, no problem, because they share a building with the US Customs at this small little border crossing. So I did my little U-turn. I went no more than 100 yards into Canada, came back down. The US guy was no happier with the story than the Canadian was, and they held me for 4 hours, taking the car apart that I had just put back together. So that did not work out the way that I had hoped, but I got to spend a lot of time at the border crossing. Friday, I went back to the airport, to the small little airport, Flathead Airport, and I had about 10 minutes left before I had to go catch a flight and head back to South Carolina. I still had not spotted the bird, but I saw a guy at the side of the road. And as you all know, if you're looking for a tough to find bird and you see a couple of people in cars, you figure there's a good chance maybe they're on the bird. So I stopped and asked the gentleman, I said, hey, look, any chance you're a bird? And he goes, yep. And I said, any chance you've seen that snowy owl? He said, you mean the one over there? And it was about 30, 40 feet from his car, sitting on the backside of a shed. And it turned out to be fantastic. So I got to see the snowy and get a couple of good pictures and still managed to catch my flight. So that worked out pretty well. So I felt pretty excited about that. Raptors by state. I get asked a lot, what raptors did I see in what state? And I'm going to share that with you now But I want to be clear. I saw multiple of these raptors in multiple states, but I only picked one. In the book, there's 53 chapters, one on each bird. So I just picked the one that I thought might be the most interesting to share. And so that's what I put down. So as you listen to the states that I've highlighted and the birds that I've seen, of course, they can be seen in most of them in multiple states and in different regions of the country. But there were 5 states where I saw 1 or 2 of the 53 birds where that went into the book: North Dakota, Pennsylvania, Wyoming, Minnesota, and New Jersey. So those were fun. There were 2 states with 4, Florida being one, Colorado being the other. All 4 of the ones that I used from Colorado were small owls, and all of those were from Rocky Mountain National Park. And there's a gentleman whose name I'll bring up later on that helped me out with that, with getting me on those birds and allowed me to be part of his banding team for a few days. And it was a really neat experience. There was 2 states with 5, California and Arizona. And obviously both those states could have had more if I'd chosen to use those. There was 1 state with 8, and that was Montana. I loved Montana, so I kept going back and found a number of birds there. The snowy owl, the short and long-eared, the rough-legged hawk, the Harlan's hawk, although that's not part of the 53, but I think one day it'll be the 54th, the American goshawk, and my last 2, the gyrfalcon and northern hawk owl. And I'll talk about those a little bit later, but those were my toughest 2 to find. And I had tremendous help from people in Montana to get on those. I used 9 from South Carolina and 11 from Texas. There's so many of the birds that just kind of show up there. And while it's not counted among the 53, and I don't know if any of you have had a chance to go down and see it, but I did go down and see the bat falcon when it was there 2 years ago, and had an opportunity to see that. So that was a pretty neat thing, pretty special thing. So those are the states that are highlighted in the book by a various number of raptors. I visited a number of hawk watches. These are 8 or 9 of them that I visited. And by the way, just as a point, as you read these, it drove my editor crazy, because if you look, everybody spells hawk watch differently. 2 words, 1 word, capital W, small w. And my poor editor was trying to figure out what was what. And I said, just take what I sent you and we'll go with that. One of the things that I discovered, I saw 24 different species at all of the hawk watches in total, thousands and thousands of raptors. Oddly enough, what it turned out, what I learned about myself on this, is I'm not a giant fan of hawk watches. I have tremendous respect for the people that work there and watch these and do the counts and learn how to count, wing beats between a Cooper's and a Sharpie and figure all that out. But for me, one of the things that I love about raptors is usually when you find one, you get a chance to watch it for a little bit. They're not flitting around like warblers and whatnot, and I love that. You get a chance to get some great photographs, and here that's not part of what happens at hawk watches. And so it's not a knock on any of them. It's just a little bit different than the way that I enjoy watching my raptors. These were my one-time sightings. These were birds that I saw a single time on the trip. There were 8 of them. And most of them I've seen since then in different places. I was telling Dennis before we started that I just got back from a couple of weeks down in Africa, where I got to see 3 different species of goshawk, which was just so cool for me. I love those birds, and getting to see 3 different species over the course of the couple of weeks was just fantastic. And so I thoroughly enjoyed that. But these were the challenging ones, or at least they were for me. And a lot of the things that I learned and share in the book would make it easier to find them again. But nonetheless, that was the challenge as I was going through. Ferruginous pygmy owl is one of those that I saw multiple of them on the same morning. For those of you that are familiar with the King Ranch down in Texas, which is a massive ranch, that is the best and the easiest place to find these in the States. And I went down and took a tour there. And I mean, to give you an idea of the size, if you don't know, the King Ranch is 825,000 acres. The entire state of Rhode Island is 777,000. So a single ranch in Texas is larger than a state. But I went down and took a tour. There were, I think, 4 of us in the truck plus the guide. And early in the morning, we kind of heard one. I didn't really want to count herds only, and it wasn't a good listen anyway, so I wasn't counting it. And then later we saw one, but it wasn't a great look, but it was a clear look. And so I knew that I'd at least checked that box. And then when we pulled over for lunch, they have a picnic table somewhere out in the middle of the ranch. We pull over, we sit down, and we're not there 2 or 3 minutes when I look up at a tree about 20 feet away, and this is the bird that was sitting there. And it sat there during the entire lunch. You could have taken 500 pictures of it if you wanted to. And so that was just a spectacular thing for me. I did a recent trip in Costa Rica, and you can see ferruginous quite frequently during the day down in Costa Rica. So that's another place to see them, but I couldn't count that. I can only count them here in the US. And on the King Ranch, I also picked up my white-tailed hawk. And you may or may not know, but it's a white-tailed hawk down in Texas is also known as a fire hawk. And the reason for that is it is a smart predator. And when prairie fires hit throughout Texas, as you can imagine, it sends small birds and insects soaring into the sky trying to get away from the fire. And so the white-tailed hawks trail the fires and just start picking off the survivors from the fire. And so they have gathered up the name of a fire hawk. Apparently, if you see a prairie fire in Texas, you're going to find dozens of white-tailed hawks trailing that. So that's kind of a neat thing to know. This was one of the animals, one of the owls I was having a little trouble finding. When I was at King Ranch, there was a kid, I don't mean that disrespectfully, but he was a 20-year-old student at UC Davis. And he was down looking for the ferruginous, and I told him about this thing that I was doing. He said, by the way, if you have trouble finding the spotted owl, my summer project for school was spotting spotted owls and marking their territory so the lumber companies would give them a wide berth and allow them to nest and breed. And so I can probably get you on one. So I did call him, and he was kind enough to meet me. He told me where to meet, and he said, you have to get this right because where we're going, there's no cell service, and we're going to meet at 5 in the morning. So if we cross wires, we're not going to be able to connect. Fortunately, his directions were perfect. We parked the car, we hiked in maybe a mile into the forest, and he goes, okay, now we're going to go find a spotted owl. And he turns around and hands me a machete. And I thought, well, that's unusual. I've been on a few birding trips. I've not had to use a machete before. And we wound up having to cut our way through the forest. And we went in a few hundred yards and came to a small clearing. And here was this spotted owl sitting, this picture, he's maybe 10 feet off the ground. And we had carried our breakfast in. And so we sat down on a log to eat breakfast. And this guy didn't leave. He sat there and preened and closed his eyes and relaxed. At one point, a mouse ran by, so he dropped down and grabbed it and ate it while we watched. And it was an amazing thing. It was a gift to be able to watch this bird for close to an hour, and to have it so completely really indifferent to us. And that was one of the joyful mornings. We found 3 or 4 more spotted owls over the course of the day, but this one was very definitely the highlight. Swallow-tailed kite is the first bird that I wrote about in the book. My story is my son and I we enjoy cigars. Matter of fact, when we're done here tonight, he and I are going to sit out by the fire and have a cigar. But a couple of weeks, maybe a month after we'd moved here, we were doing that, sitting out on a screen porch having a cigar, and some birds were flying around. And I said to him, hey, Justin, his name's Justin. I said, I'm gonna have to learn what these birds are here. I don't know why, but suddenly I'm intrigued about what that is. And a couple of days later, to my surprise, a Sibley guide showed up that my son had ordered for me, and that got me going on it. On this particular day, we were out on the boat, we live on a lake. We were out on the lake and just lying down on the benches and having a cigar. And a couple of swallowtail kites flew over the lake, and they'd never been spotted in this county before. And we got to talking about it, and by the time we got back to shore, the idea for this book and the name of the book, RaptorQuest, had come out of that time just hanging around out on the lake. And so we managed to get this picture as they flew overhead. There were two of them. And so that's the first chapter of the book. And you know, heck, it might be my favorite because it involves my son. This is the gentleman. Well, this is a picture of me in Rocky Mountain National Park working on a small owl banding project. There's a gentleman there named Scott Rashid who has devoted the last 24 years of his life to studying the small owls, and the northern pygmy and the northern saw-whet, the boreal, and I'm always forgetting one. I apologize, but it'll come back to me. But he's published a number of books on these owls. This is what he devotes his life to. He's been studying them forever. He's got multiple notebooks of the work that he's been doing with them. And so some way or another, we got connected. And I've now gone out there 3 years in a row in order to just spend time with him and look for the owls and stuff. And this little guy is one of the ones that we banded, and I got to release, and that was spectacular. But we would hike around, and he has unbelievable patience. He was convinced that a northern pygmy owl had set up a nest in a tree out in the middle of absolutely nowhere. So we went out and we sat. The only place you could see the tree, you had to sit in a 6-inch creek that was frozen water. I mean, it was recently melted snow coming down. We had 2 lawn chairs, and we literally had to sit for 18 hours until we were able to see the owl. And I don't know that he ever would have left. I mean, I was so relieved in the 18th hour when we saw it, because he didn't appear to me to have any intention of leaving, but I guess that's why he's really good at what he does. You know what it is? The fourth one, I'm sorry, is the flammulated. That's what it is. And it's the only one of the 53 that was heard only. The other 52, I got good looks at, but the flammulated, I did not. And still haven't, by the way. So that is something I'm looking forward to. And I was just out there with him in Colorado about a month ago or 6 weeks ago, and didn't find one there, unfortunately, but eventually I will. And I'm excited about that. It gives me something to shoot for. But if you're ever at Rocky Mountain National Park, or if you're planning on going out to Colorado and visit, man, send me a note and I'll hook you up with Scott, because he likes nothing more than showing off his park and showing off, quote unquote, his birds. And he's very, very good at it. If they're there in the park, he will find them. This is a sharp-shinned hawk, not a difficult bird to find around the country, certainly not in the East Coast. And this one, I was going to Commissary Ridge in Wyoming, and I had GPS coordinates for it. There was a banding station and a hawk watch up there, and there was a gal that I knew that was working that. And by the way, amazing people. They work every day for 7 or 8 weeks, except they get Wednesday afternoon off, and they work from sunrise to sunset. There are no showers or anything. So on Wednesday afternoon, they go into town, they get a shower and buy their food for the next 7 days. And they do that for 7 or 8 weeks. And they sit on top of it's a treeless, plantless hill that they sit on. And they've built these little rock seats, if you will, these little forts that come up about 2 feet, and they've got a pad in there, and they lean back against that, and that's where they sit for 10 or 12 hours a day watching raptors fly by. I got to hold and release this Sharpie from the banding, which was really cool to be able to do that. But I was just amazed at the commitment these people made. And by the way, the GPS did not get me where I needed to go. I drove around for almost an hour trying to figure it out. And finally, I stopped. There was a beautiful wood gate and what looked like a magnificent ranch. So I boldly opened up the gate, closed it behind me once I got inside. It was about a half mile, 3/4 of a mile before I got to the ranch house. I got there and I knock on the door, and this woman answers the door, and she was somewhere between 50 and 150 years old. She looked like she was made out of leather. She didn't weigh 90 pounds. She had this amazing smile. And as soon as she opened the door, she said, "You looking for the Hawk Watch?" And I said, "I am." She goes, "Yep, that GPS doesn't get anybody there. Eventually, they all wind up at my ranch." And she was very kind, got me something to drink, and then told me the best way to get there. And her directions were perfect. But I can still see her in my head, and it makes me smile every time. So she was an absolute doll. She didn't seem to be upset at all that people were popping into her ranch and trying to get some directions. Red-tailed hawk, it's the most common of all of the raptors in the United States. And a couple of stories, you may know these. Forgive me if you do, but when you watch a television commercial or a TV show or a movie, and there are bald eagles in it that let out the screech, I see Dennis nodding. It is not their high-pitched Mike Tyson call that you're hearing. You're hearing the screech from a red-tailed hawk, which I think is one of the coolest sounds in nature when a red-tailed hawk lets out its war cry. But I love the fact, and by the way, about 95% of those are one single screech. The sound engineers share the same recording. So if you see it in a movie and then see it on a commercial and see it in a TV show, the odds are very good that you're hearing the same red-tailed hawk from over 20 years ago giving out this war cry that somebody was able to record almost perfectly. What a lot of people don't know is one of the reasons that we have so many red-tailed hawks is because of President Dwight Eisenhower. So when he was president, he decided to build the national highway system, right? The interstate highway system. And one of his goals, one of the things he wanted was every 5 miles to have 1 mile of perfectly straight highway so that if the Cold War turned into a hot war, we'd be able to land bombers and do different things. But what nobody realized, it certainly wasn't the intent. It was an unforeseen consequence, but a positive one, was in doing these highways and clearing both sides of the highway, you know, as in most areas they are, and putting up telephone poles, it created perfect habitat for red-tailed hawks. And so red-tailed hawks just started breeding and aggressively moving across country. And there are some places, I remember I was up in North Dakota and we were driving along kind of a desolate road. It wasn't part of the interstate highway, but it still reminded me of it. And I would say that 9 out of 10 telephone poles that we passed had red-tailed hawks sitting on them. And so from that, they just exploded and are now very common, no less enjoyable for that. Might be my favorite bird if not an osprey. But I love that Eisenhower story. So peregrine falcon, and I will let you know right up front, this is the only photo in the book that was not taken in the wild. I'm on the board of a raptor center, and this was a rehab peregrine, but I love the shot so much that I went ahead and used it. Since then, I've picked up some really nice shots. If any of you have been, Torrey Pines in San Diego has peregrines year round. They nest on a cliff. You walk along the beach. And so if I reprint the book, I'll replace this picture. But that's the picture that I used from my time on the board there. And peregrines, as a lot of you may know, are the best of our urban raptors, not counting turkey and black vultures. But they are in every major city now in the United States, and cities are encouraging them. Matter of fact, I was in Atlanta recently, and on the 50th floor of the Four Seasons Hotel, they built a peregrine box trying to attract peregrines because they kill pigeons. And the reason that they do so well in cities is they're cliff nesters, and skyscrapers remind them of cliffs. And so they set their nests up on these skyscrapers. They're in every major city. I was in New York in May, and the nests there have become so common. They're on every single bridge going through New York City, and a couple of the bridges have multiple ones because they're not as territorial in the cities because there's unlimited number of pigeons in New York. So it's a non-issue for them. But the idea of getting to watch a peregrine falcon as you're walking down, Fifth Avenue in New York City it's just amazing to me. And cities are now trying to attract them, as many as they can. So that's kind of cool. This is a bald eagle, just from around the house here in a place called Dobbins Farm. And for those of you that love bald eagles, if you're not familiar with it, in Maryland on the Susquehanna River, there's a place called the Conowinga Dam. And when the shad run through, which happens, I think, in November, because I'm heading back up there, but the shad run through, and as they go through the dam, many of them get killed or knocked out. And so it's easy picking for bald eagles. So there are literally hundreds of bald eagles in an area the size of 3 or 4 football fields. And you can watch them all day long. You can watch them sweep down and take shad. You can watch them steal from the cormorants that are there, or the osprey. You can watch them battle each other. But if you enjoy bald eagles, or you enjoy shooting bald eagles, that is the place to go. And if you get a chance, it is well worth the trip. If you love osprey, and I do, the place that I have found, there may be better, but the place that I have found that's the best place to see them is a place called Sebastian Inlet on the east side of Florida, just an hour north of Vero Beach. And this is a mullet. And when the mullets run in the fall, they're running now, there are dozens and dozens of osprey. And they've got a pier that goes out that it was designed for photographers and birders. And you can watch osprey from sunup to sundown, gathering up as many mullets as they want. And I had mentioned that osprey might be my favorite of all the raptors. And there's a couple of things about them that are unique to osprey among all raptors in the world. One is they have a pure sushi diet. There's some discussion that occasionally they will take something else. I don't know that that's true, but whether it is or not, it's 99.9% of the time they're eating sushi. They are the only bird in the world that takes a lunch with them when they migrate. So like all birds, they fill up completely, their organs shrink, and they double their weight and they're ready to go. But the last thing an osprey does before it takes off, like to fly the 600 miles across the Gulf of Mexico, is grab one last fish. And over the time that it's flying over the Gulf of Mexico, it's just bowing its head and eating its lunch. And they are the only bird in the world that does that. They are a true diving bird, whereas a bald eagle is a skimmer. An osprey can dive 2.5 feet underwater, and they are the only raptor whose eyesight corrects for refraction. So if you've ever been looking like in a river or a pond and you see a fish and it is not where you think it is because of refraction. And osprey are the one bird, the one raptor that corrects for that. So from 150 feet up, they can see a bird where it actually is and dive down 2.5 feet and take it. And I just think they're remarkable for that. This was a great gray owl that I got up at Yellowstone National Park. It was minus 25 degrees that day. And it was obviously in the middle of winter. And the rangers told me that I was the only guest in the park, which is amazing because in the summer when you go, there are 17 to 20,000 guests per day. And on that day that I was there, I was the only one there. And it was really cool. One of the rangers helped get me on this gray owl, and I got to watch it for a while. And as you may know, they dive through snow, kind of like osprey through water. A great gray owl can dive up to about 18 or 24 inches of snow to pull out a mole or a vole or a rat or a mouse. And I got to see that happen a number of times in the time that I was watching them. If you love owls and you haven't been, a great place to go is Sax-Sim Bog up in Minnesota, which is fairly well known for its owls. And if you have a good trip up there, a good 3 or 4 days, you can see a great gray, a boreal, a snowy, northern hawk, northern saw-whet, a barred, and a great horned. It can be quite an owl trip up there. But I will warn you, just because I think it's an odd thing, the first time that I went there, I stopped at the visitor center and they hand you a little map, shows you the roads that you can take. And then I noticed in italics, there was a note that says, avoid the north end of Stickney Road if possible. This is not a birder-friendly location. Well, as it turns out, in Sax-Sim Bog, there are a few private residences that are grandfathered in since it's become a park. And some of these people do not enjoy birders coming down their street, especially on Stickney Road, and fire off shotguns in the direction of birders. So I don't know if there were more birds down Stickney Road than I saw in other places, but I did not go to find out. I did chase some rarities on the trip. The bat falcon I mentioned down in Texas, the Steller sea eagle in Maine, and I imagine a lot of you know about the Eurasian eagle owl that was cut loose from the Central Park Zoo in New York and managed to live on its own for 2 years in Central Park, and then unfortunately was killed a couple months ago when it flew into a building. But I did get to see that as well, and that was another great thing. This is a northern hawk owl. It's the cover of my book. It's the last of the 53. I had been in Montana where I picked up the gyrfalcon. I flew home, and about 3 or 4 days later, I got a call that there was a northern hawk owl. My wife kindly put me on a plane. I turned around and went back to a place called Wise River, Montana. But Wise River, Montana was fairly secretive about where this owl was. And again, as you may know, eBird ghosts some of the more rare raptors. They don't want, they get poached a lot and they get sold. And so with a northern hawk owl, you can report that you've seen one, but it won't give you the exact coordinates like it does on almost every other bird. It just give you like a huge county. And the people up there didn't trust me immediately, but I figured I'd get up there and hopefully earn their trust. So I got up, flew in, drove about 3 or 4 hours. I had allotted 4 days to try to find the bird, but on the first afternoon of that, I'd just drive around town a little bit and figure stuff out. And as I was pulling into town, there was a pretty good looking dirt road. So I jumped on that dirt road, drove down about 3/4 of a mile, saw 2 cars on the side of the road. I thought, oh, it can't be this easy. And sure enough, I pulled over and there was this northern hawk owl sitting on a defunct telephone pole on the opposite side of a 1-lane dirt road and just hanging out there. I watched it for 2 or 3 hours that afternoon, went back the next morning and watched it, and then the following afternoon, and got some really terrific shots of it. And one of the things that happened, and to me it was magical, it was mystical, is I was there by myself and it was cold. It was negative temperatures, and it was sitting on that telephone pole, and I was on the opposite side of the road taking pictures and just watching. And suddenly it dropped from the pole and flew across the dirt road, and its left wing brushed against my left leg as it went by. And then it just dropped into a bush that was on the other side of the road. And I don't know why that means so much to me or why it seems so significant, but it really does. And it was a fantastic way to wrap up the 53 birds. I imagine that's why it's on the cover. It was recency bias, I'm sure. But I don't regret it being there and absolutely love the time. As Dennis had mentioned, I've written more than 50 books, but this one was different than anything I've written. I've written children's books and business books and books of quotations and a ton of Westerns, but this was different. This was special. And I felt blessed to have been able to do it and to see and do the things that I did. If you're intrigued by the story or intrigued by the book, you can pick it up on my website, which is naturallyscott.com. And no pressure, nothing along those lines, but every photograph in the book is mine, and the stories are mine, and the experiences are mine. And I'm working now on my next book, which is called American Safari Zoos Without Fences. And the idea there is that there are places around the country where if you go to an exact location and you go at the right time, you're as close to guaranteed to seeing the animal, the bird or the mammal, as you're ever going to be, like the osprey in Sebastian Inlet or the bald eagles up at Conowinga Dam. And there's a number of those places, forgive me, around the country. I've added in some mammals on that as well, and that's been a blast to be writing. I'm looking forward to finishing that. I want to say thank you, Dennis, and to everyone here who's hung in. for the 45 minutes. Dennis, I tried to keep it at 45, and I think we're at 45. I want to publicly thank all those people that helped me along the way. And there were certainly a lot of them. And of course, my wife, Randy, who has always been supportive of my hobbies, and I'm blessed by that. And as I had said to Dennis before we started this thing, before he opened it up, this is my favorite part. If anybody has any questions, I am thrilled to answer them. So if you've got them, fire away. And either way, thank you very, very much for your time this evening.
Well, if we were live, we'd give you a round of applause about this time, but we thank you for coming and sharing all your stories with us.
Did you have any experts, in particular scientific experts that you relied on?
Yes, I did. For example, the gentleman I mentioned, Scott Rashid in Colorado. There was a gentleman named Bill Clark down in Texas who helped me out with quite a few of the birds. I was able to call people around the country and they helped me. And a lot of the places I went, like when I went to Montana the first time, I hired a guide for the day or maybe a couple of days to take me around and show me some spots. But then when I went back the other times, I went on my own. And same thing in Texas and in Florida. When I would go to some place I hadn't been before, I would hire a guide and they would be able to put me not just on the birds, but on the right places to go and visit. And that was tremendously valuable. But then after that, I wanted to try to do it on my own. Although with some of these guides, we became friends and I still see them. I was in Montana in May and spent some time with the guide that helped me out there. I was down in Florida in April and spent some time with the guide that initially helped me there. So they've become friends over time. But I absolutely had help from birding experts and ornithologists and scientists. I would not have been able to do it without them.
Can you talk about the access to the King Ranch in Texas?
Oh,
How to get in there?
you can look that up online. I think they open in March each year. You can book a tour online. The way my schedule worked out, it was perfect because as I was going through Texas on that trip, I happened to be there the day they opened for the season. They take you out in a van. The guy that does it, shoot, I forget, Tom is his first name, and he's been working there, I think, close to 30 years. They've seen hundreds of species of birds, and they've got a number of mammals as well. And they take you out in a van. They provide lunch. He absolutely knows the birds. He knows where to find them. He knows that you're there, that a lot of people are there to see the ferruginous. And that is available to the public. That didn't require any connections or anything along those lines. As a matter of fact, I believe they've got a mottled owl there, which I saw recently in Panama, but I have not seen in the States. But one seemed to have worked its way up from southern Mexico or maybe even Central America and has been hanging out now in southern Texas. So I'm hoping to get down to see that. But yeah, you can just look up King Ranch online, go to their website, and they've got a variety of tours. You can do a half day, a full day, a 3-day. They've got some nice little cabins out there. They do a lot of hunting. They've got their own breed of cows that they have created over the years. It's a couple 100-year-old ranch. And it is worth the trip down there. Being a birder, it's spectacular, but even as a non-birder, it would be a really great place to go.
What results have you seen from your book in terms of just awareness about raptors and their importance and that sort of thing? Have you had any feedback from any of your readers?
I have, although I don't know that it's really had an impact as much as it's just reinforced for people. I think the people that have bought the book outside of my family and friends who are generous enough to buy my books, they're mostly, I think, from the responses I've got, they're people who already loved raptors. I don't think I'm creating new raptor lovers, except among my circle of friends and family. And again, there's nothing. It is not a scientific book. It is not a book that an ornithologist would have written. It is a book of stories and adventures. I do some research on the birds, and I share that in the chapters. And then in addition to the 53 chapters, one on each bird, I've probably got about 20 other chapters in there that are essays about the people I met or the things I learned or the experiences that I had. So I tried to personalize it a little bit along those lines. And I've gotten some really nice compliments from people that have read it. And I haven't found anybody else who has done this, which was one of the things that intrigued me. And it is, I was telling Dennis before we started, I just got back from Africa a couple of days ago, and I saw 15 new. I'd never been to Africa before, but I saw 15 new raptors while I was down there, and I just love them. My heart jumps. I would rather watch a raptor that I've already seen than pick up a lifer that's a non-raptor. If those options are available to me on a particular trip, I will pull up a chair. I carry a chair in my truck, and I will pull up a chair and watch raptors for hours if they'll let me. So it is, I don't know what it is exactly, but there is something about them that to me is miraculous. And all the other birds are great. Don't get me wrong, for hummingbird fans and warbler fans and waterfowl fans, I enjoy those as well. But I'm like a crow with a shiny object if a raptor goes by. So.
Any thoughts about making any of your adventures children's books along the lines of Owl Moon, that sort of thing?
You know what? I have. I've written one children's book, and I've started a couple more, and I think that may be the focus that I'm going to do. I'm kind of writing them for my grandson. I got to brag for just a second because my wife and I just found out this week that our daughter's giving us a granddaughter. So we are thrilled about that. But yeah, I've started a couple books that are about, one's about an osprey, and then another one is about an owl, but I'm not sure what owl yet. And those will definitely be children's books, and those are fun to write, and coming up with the story. So I'm excited about doing that. Thank you for asking that, by the way.
We need some more. So anyway,
yeah,
our kids love Owl Moon and a few others, but I can't remember the other ones off the top of my head.
Yeah, well, I'll see if I can write one that's worthy of sharing with your children or grandchildren.
Thank you. And I did write a comment that you're always welcome to come back and see our short-eared owls in the winter.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I would love to do that. I was blessed on April 7th. We had an eastern screech owl pair set up in our front yard about 20 yards from my front porch. We had the cicadas down here this year, and there was so much food that they weren't territorial at all. There was another one right across the street in the forest. And these guys set up, and from April 7th to June 8th, which is when the three fledged, every night that my wife and I were in state, we would sit out on the porch for about 2 hours and watch those eastern screech owls. So we watched them grow and the whole thing, and it was just spectacular. I just felt so incredibly fortunate. As a matter of fact, last night when I got home, went out to dinner, and when I got home for the first time in a month or so, I heard an eastern screech owl. So I'd like to think they're coming back, but it might have just been passing through. I don't know.
Well, I'd just like to say, I think that the pursuit that you had to see all the raptors in the lower 48 is very cool and very interesting. I meet a lot of birders, and everybody's got their thing. They've got they want to see the birds in this county or this state or in their yard or in the month or in the year, as you mentioned. But yours is the first that I've heard of this, and I just think it's super cool that you did it and that you're telling us about it. Thanks.
Well, Pete, that's very generous of you. Thank you. And yeah, it was a thrill, and I truly felt blessed by the whole experience. Seeing the 53 birds, of course, but really it was the people. I think that's one of the things I've grown to love about birding is, I guess people are competitive, they want to tick off their life list and do all that. But the nice thing is that if I get on a bird and you come up behind me, it doesn't detract from my getting the bird if I share it with you. Whereas a lot of hobbies are more zero sum. And this one isn't. As a matter of fact, it multiplies the joy. It leverages the joy to be able to share. I've got a buddy coming over tomorrow night. We're just going to sit and have a cigar. We've got a little bird sanctuary out in the front yard, and we'll both have our cameras, and we're just going to sit and have a cigar for a couple hours and and watch the common house birds that we get, the blue jays and the cardinals and the chickadees and the titmice, and what a great evening. What a terrific thing to be able to do. We're not going to see anything unusual. The odds are, but by God, it's going to be a fun night, and we'll share it together and hopefully get a couple of decent pictures.
Well, thank you for all your stories and your entertainment. We really appreciate you taking the time to come talk with us here.
Thank you for sharing your evening with me, and for the questions, and for allowing me to speak to your group. It's a fantastic thing. I'm really honored. Thank you.